Hello everybody, my name is Quasi, and I think I actually found evidence that revives a long forgotten theory. One that not only helps us understand the identity of two major characters, but also gives us a narrative throughline that connects their appearances to one single person. While I'd love to jump right in and tell you, we first need to go over what led me to ever even considering this in the first place. And it all started when I did a little digging into FNAF 4. This game seems to keep on giving in recent years. For it coming out over a decade ago, having a game where we still don't completely understand what it was telling us is a bit crazy, even in this franchise. So one night I was relaxing, watching some of the FNAF 4 jump scares by myself, when I noticed something. Something that led me on a goose chase for over a month. Something so obscure that I might just be crazy for discerning any meaning from it. And it's all because of Nightmare. Let me just show you, take a look. Do you notice? No? Well, it's probably because you don't have anything to compare it to. So here's Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare's jump scares side by side. His jump scare doesn't trigger the blood effect like all the other nightmares do. When he appears, the game simply resets back to the main menu, completely skipping the blood screen. Let's try to come up with a good reason why this detail would exist in the first place, and give FNAF 4 a good spot in the timeline while we're at it. It's pretty widely accepted now that the night sections of FNAF 4 take place from the perspective of Michael Afton. During these nights, we see as he continues to suffer from his trauma in the nightmare chambers. We learn about these chambers in the story Didophobia, where we learn that William Afton experimented on kids by inducing these horrific nightmares through a hallucinogenic gas. We can even see two forms of these chambers during Sister Location, on the Breaker map during the part where you gotta fend off Funtime Freddy. We can clearly see not only the FNAF 4 house layout, but also the layout of the Fun with Plushtrap minigame. This is to say that the night sections of FNAF 4 were real. Except that's not fully true. While the nightmare experiments did happen to Michael, that doesn't mean they're what we see in FNAF 4. There's quite a few details that suggest the nights of FNAF 4 are just nightmares. Nightmares of what Michael experienced in the chambers. This firmly places FNAF 4 and Nightmare's appearance absolutely anywhere across the entire timeline. So let's keep finding criteria for when it has to take place. Many people point to this distorted radio ambience that can sometimes be heard during the nights. While it sounds like nothing at first, when you reverse it, you can hear the FNAF 1 phone call. This not only confirms that Michael is the protagonist of FNAF 4, due to him being the only person to hear that call, but also pretty solidly sets it after FNAF 1. FNAF 1 is probably around the midpoint of the original timeline, so this actually gives us a lot of ideas to toss around. However, if we really think about it, I think we can find out exactly when FNAF 4 takes place. And it's all because of Plushtrap. This guy has always been really weird because it's made clear in the Breaker map that the Fun with Plushtrap section is also a real experiment chamber. So that means William made a small version of himself based directly on how he appears after he was dead. This doesn't really make much sense, but I'm pretty confident I found an answer. The Halloween update to FNAF 4 came out with a ton of new characters included. However, during the lead up to this update, Scott stated that all of it is non-canon. All except for Nightmare Balloon Boy. This has been kinda confusing up to this day. Why is Nightmare Balloon Boy canon, but characters like Nightmario and not? I mean, later he literally appears on the cover art for a mainline game. It's weird. But I think this is because Nightmare Balloon Boy and Plushtrap share a very similar role. In fact, their mechanics are near identical. They both are in the same room, do the same movements, and you have the same win condition for both of them. You see, that's exactly why I think he's canon. Nightmare Balloon Boy didn't replace Plushtrap. Plushtrap replaced him. I believe that what Nightmare Balloon Boy being canon is supposed to convey is that in the actual experiments these children went through, the animatronic sitting in this chair right here was Nightmare Balloon Boy. It was only later that Michael reinterpreted him into Plushtrap after seeing his father during the events of FNAF 3. Now I know instantly you're all pointing at the screen and saying, but what about the Plushtrap toy the girl in the minigame has? So let me show you my reasoning. This girl only ever describes her toy as a Spring Bonnie toy. With how many toys we see of every character in this game, it would only make sense for Spring Bonnie to also have one. She does reference it being a finger trap, but it reads to me as a bit of a more tongue-in-cheek reference. If it was literally Plushtrap, I would imagine she would call it by that, just like they do in the Frights books. And if it's not anything I said, then it's probably some memory loop victim stuff or something. All of this is to say that I believe the nights of FNAF 4 take place after FNAF 3. Now, this is a way bigger deal than it seems because for once we can have a definite timeline of Michael's story, which leads back to where this whole spiral started. Why does Nightmare not have any blood during his jump scare? It feels like such a particularly weird detail. It almost seems like Nightmare doesn't kill you. Pretty much everything in FNAF 4 is related to this single event. The minigames show everything that leads to the bite, and the nights show Michael's guilt following him for decades after. Nearly every single detail this game has to offer shows us something new about these two brothers. And I think the detail that we discovered about Nightmare is not an exception. It's incredibly strange that Nightmare appears at all in this game. I just can't stress enough how weird it is to have both of these characters appear if they're supposed to fill the same role. But I don't think they do. Nightmare Fredbear is Michael's guilt, sure, but Nightmare is different. Nightmare doesn't kill you. Nightmare is ghostly. A ghostly bear that takes the role of Fredbear in Michael's dreams really only makes you think of one character. Nightmare is the crying child. Now, funny enough, this was actually a pretty popular theory for a long time. It's lost its crown recently to seemingly better contenders for who Nightmare is, but it's always had its reasons for being popular, and I think even now it still stands on its feet pretty well. Despite the old school FNAF method of clue finding, counting the toes and finding brains, it also has a huge narrative payoff. The final boss of the game being the kid that you just saw killed is very Scott Cawthon-y. A similar thing happens in FNAF 3, where only on the final night do you understand that Springtrap is actually William. Now, a big question revolving this is why the crying child would become Nightmare, rather than haunting Fredbear or Golden Freddy. While Nightmare is very obviously related to Fredbear, being a color swap and details like his bow tie and hat being just a straight inversion, it just doesn't make sense. Why isn't he just Fredbear then? While we can't find the answer for the time being, this connection leads us to talk about the other big connection in this series between a golden and a dark bear. These two are what makes this theory. Golden Freddy is literally the Fredbear suit that killed the crying child, so Nightmare Fredbear is undoubtedly supposed to be a Golden Freddy stand-in. However, Shadow Freddy seems to be a bit more debated. Not only are they both color swaps, but there's even a direct connection between them in the files of FNAF 4. So if Shadow Freddy literally is Nightmare, and the crying child might also be Nightmare, then the crying child might be the spirit behind Shadow Freddy. Despite this, I still think he's haunting Golden Freddy, alongside Cassidy, the 5th MCI victim. While this probably seems contradictory, we can find an answer in the form of the greatest and most canon FNAF character ever created, Andrew. In the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, Andrew is a spirit possessing William Aftons' corpse, keeping him alive and torturing him endlessly. Some details about Andrew are really interesting to me. During this story, he appears around the hospital and actively stops the staff from trying to put William out of his misery. While he's doing this, he is described to have two completely different appearances. One is a little boy with an alligator mask, and the other is a shadow. What I'm implying is that the crying child and Cassidy can both project themselves outside of the Golden Freddy suit. And when doing this, each of them have a different separate appearance to the suit. Cassidy being a child, and the crying child being a shadow. So this all begs the question we initially brought up. Why is Shadow Freddy separate from Golden Freddy in FNAF 2? Well, frankly, he's kind of a chud. I'm not serious, but the crying child is shown in pretty much every characterization to just be a scared kid, not really with the intent of hurting other people. While on the other side of the coin, Cassidy has always seemed to be angrier, more vengeful, you could say. The way I interpret Shadow Freddy here is that the crying child doesn't want to participate in killing the night guard of the game. Now this inevitably brings up the question, where is Shadow Freddy in FNAF 1 then? Obviously, Shadow Freddy never appears in this game, partially because Scott didn't think of it, but also because I think the crying child and Cassidy are aligned in this moment. I don't think Golden Freddy is strictly hostile when we see him in this game. And my reason for thinking this is because of how different Golden Freddy acts between the two games. In FNAF 2, when Shadow Freddy is separated from Golden Freddy, we see a far more aggressive side to him. He acts as any other animatronic, appearing often and even being able to be adjusted in the custom night of the game. But in FNAF 1, he rarely appears and is a completely separate Easter egg than the main four animatronics. My thinking is if FNAF 1 Golden Freddy really wanted you dead, he would just insta-teleport into the office and melt your brain like he did to Ralph in the week before. But he doesn't. So far this all starts to line up pretty well. But we do have another big hurdle to go over. One that needs a little bit more explaining, I think. And that would be follow me. Oh boy, here is the big climax. I think the Follow Me minigame in FNAF 3 is probably the single most important minigame in this whole franchise. Each night, Shadow Freddy guides one of the main four animatronics to the safe room. When they get there, William quickly jumps out and dismantles them. This is repeated over and over until the final night, where you appear as the fifth missing kid, Cassidy. This time though, Shadow Freddy doesn't guide you. You walk and you find William as the other four ghosts block the doorway, trapping him. A lot of people interpret Shadow Freddy here as acting for William, which is pretty understandable. But with Shadow Freddy always appearing so docile, it's really strange to me that he would be working with or for the big bad evil of the entire franchise. Not only that, but these minigames directly lead to William's death anyways. All of what I have said could be debated against, I admit, but there's two other pieces of evidence that I constantly see people fail to mention, and I think they both work together incredibly well. The first one is literally from the trailer to FNAF 3. Right before we get our first look at Springtrap in the series, we see this text appear on screen. We have a place for him. This is very clearly a threat from the spirits. They have a place for him, William Afton. Whether that's outright killing him or springlocking him like what actually happened, we don't really know. But the second piece of evidence is just as interesting in my opinion. And that's that during the final Follow Me minigame, we can see that Cassidy appears. And do you know who doesn't appear? Shadow Freddy. Cassidy appears here and she enacts her vengeful revenge on the one who killed everyone. That's why she doesn't need to be guided to where he is. She knew the plan because she created this plan. But William somehow is able to survive this spring locking. Surely this won't make her more vengeful and angry. This eventually leads us to the night sections of FNAF 3, where we not only get another look at William, but also Shadow Freddy. At the end of the week, when the place burns down, the crying child follows Michael home, a motif that we see a few times in the Fazbear Frights books. The crying child following him home is why we see Nightmare in FNAF 4. Michael is literally seeing his brother, and whether or not his brother is actually attacking him, his mind is turning this image of him into a nightmare. The nightmare. This eventually is how the crying child is at the pizzeria simulator location during the final fire. He's there right next to Michael, tying this story of these two brothers into a neat little bow. Immediately after all this happens, Happiest Day takes place and all of the souls, except for Cassidy's, are freed. So what did you bring home, Michael? I think Shadow Freddy really adds a layer to this story that is interesting. Such a small, seemingly insignificant Easter egg that can be interpreted as one of the story's defining characters is pretty satisfying in my opinion. However, I do want to talk a little bit at the end of the video here. I'm sure there's quite a lot of theorists that throughout watching this have pointed and prodded at a few details that completely discredit this theory. The biggest one of these is definitely the line that Nightmare says in Ultimate Custom Night. And while I don't have much of a satisfying answer to it, the two ideas I came with I feel like might work. The first is that the crying child did die because of neglect. His father wasn't around and dumped all these duties on his older brother,
who somehow found this job listing not intended for you.
It could be interpreted that that's what William's wickedness was, that he never cared about anyone, never even cared for his family, and never will care. The crying child as Shadow Freddy would be a literal representation of William's wickedness. He is a result of William narcissistically putting himself over anyone else. The crying child was the only death in this series that William didn't directly cause, but rather by what he didn't do. The second idea is much less satisfactory, but it's worth pointing out because I do find it interesting. It's really strange to me how cherry-picked certain lines from Ultimate Custom Night are, because I swear that most lines by most characters I never hear mentioned. And I don't blame anyone, because some of the lines in this game really don't mean anything. Obviously, it's pretty unprofessional for Scott to include lines from these mysterious characters that don't really serve a purpose, but he does just that. Now, I don't know how much I believe either of these conclusions. I really want this line to mean something, and that's why I lean towards the first idea. But now we gotta go over to the other piece of evidence that I imagine people will be mentioning. And that's the insanity ending speech that Henry gives in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator. During this speech, he says something that definitely implies that William was the one behind Follow Me. And while I definitely agree that at a first glance it seems like this, I don't know how much we can fully trust what Henry is saying here. A lot of this speech seems to be referring more to Molten MCI happening, which would make sense since he knows about Molten Freddy. But he was never there during Follow Me, and unless he watched like the videotapes or something, I don't know how he could have a good first-hand account of what actually happened. And to him, it would obviously look like William's just doing the same thing he's always done. I also want to remind you that this is the tape that he says,
"A wound first inflicted on me,"
which has a pretty decent chance of not being the case. So obviously Henry's a good guy and all that, but I don't know how much we can trust what he says here. Now, all of this is to say that it's just a theory, but I definitely think there is a case to be made that Shadow Freddy is something more than just an agony being. Plus, Shadow Freddy is like my favorite character, so doing this video has made me have more of an appreciation for both him and all the surrounding theories of what he is. So I hope you found at least some of these points interesting. This honestly turned out to be more like a bunch of theories in a big trench coat. And if you found me at all tolerable, I hope you stick around. See ya.